Good afternoon, everyone. So, I will present in this presentation my research on Chinese illegal fishing in the Yellow Sea. I just want to precise that this is the research in process and in the beginning, so it's much based on some readings and interview I had, especially in Korea and with some Chinese researchers. But I still need to improve and develop this research, especially with some research trip in Shandong, Liaoning, and also in South Korea. But I will try to give my view on this issue and general overview about the main challenge on this issue. So first, I think it's important to have a presentation, brief presentation about the Yellow Sea. The Yellow Sea is what we call an epicontinental sea. As you can see on the map, it's not a very large sea. The width of the Yellow Sea is less than 400 nautical miles. And it's not a very deep sea because the average depth of Yellow Sea is 40 meters only. And maximum depth near the Jeju-do Island here is only 137 meters. It's important also to present the situation of fisheries in the Yellow Sea. The Yellow Sea is one of the most overexploited seas in the world. And you have one table here showing the evolution of catches by fishing countries in the waters of the Yellow Sea from 1950 to 2010. And you can see the increasing of the catches from especially South Korean and Chinese catches. China has become the largest producer in the middle of the 80s in the Yellow Sea, surpassing South Korea. And since the 2000 decade, the evolution is more stable, as you can see on the table 2, from 2001 to 2013. The catches of China are stable around 2,000 ton. And regarding South Korea, we can see also stabilization of the catches. The main explanation about this evolution is the rarefaction of fishery resources in the Yellow Sea, and also the consequences about some regulations taken unilaterally and bilaterally by two states. So I will come back on this question later. The main information we can underline from this table is in 2013. You can see that China is the main producer, and the Chinese catches accounted about 88% of the total of the Yellow Sea catches. Only 20.5% for South Korea and 2.5% for Hong Kong, and only 1.6% for North Korea. So those figures confirm that the Yellow Sea is widely exploited by Chinese fishermen. This is an important information because that's explained, of course, the importance of Chinese illegal fishing in the Yellow Sea. It's necessary also to recall the geopolitical situation in the Yellow Sea, because we have in this sea one fisheries agreement between China and South Korea, and two countries decided to delineate one common fisheries zone. So after the ratification of the UNCLOS in 1996, China and South Korea decided to launch some negotiations about the delimitation of their respective EEZ. The process failed, the negotiation failed, due to a disagreement on the delimitation principle. South Korea was claiming the median line, whereas China called for the application of an equitable principle. So that means that China refused the delineation of the median line. So the median line is here. This is the claim of South Korea. And China is opposed to this principle. It just claimed for equitable principle. But there is no precise claims of the area in the Yellow Sea. So the representation of this in South Korea, it's that according to South Korean observers, or some South Korean observers, the position of China at that time was mainly a tactic for postponing the delimitation of the EEZ in order to protect practices and interests of Chinese fishermen as long as possible in the Yellow Sea, because Chinese fishermen at that time widely exploited the sea, as I mentioned before. Facing the deadlock of the delimitation of the EEZ, China and South Korea decided to sign a fisheries agreement in 2000, which is in force now since 2001. And this decision was totally in accordance with two articles of the UNCLOS. The delimitation, the signature of this fisheries agreement was necessary for two states at that time, because it was necessary for them to establish formal fisheries relations 8 years after their the normalization of their diplomatic relations in 1992. And for South Korea, it was one way for trying to protect its fisheries interest. It was better to have the fisheries zone than nothing. And for China also, it was a mean for launching some reforms at the turn of the 2000 decades. China implements some policies in the fisheries sectors. Already at that time, tried to reduce the fleet and protect fish stocks in the Yellow Sea and in coastal waters of the country. So the fishery zone was seen as a tool for implementing some reforms in the fisheries sectors in China at that time. So I will try to go fast. The China-South Korea fisheries agreement was signed in 2000. So the main objective is to promote the rational conservation and utilization of marine living resources, to maintain a stable order of the fisheries operations at sea, and to reinforce cooperation in the field of fisheries between two countries. The fisheries agreement created the provisional measure zone that we called the Common Fisheries Zone, China-South Korea Common Fisheries Zone, where Chinese and South Korean vessels, fishing vessels, can operate under the regulation edicted by a joint fisheries committee, which was also created by the agreement with the Article 13. Another objective of the agreement is to reinforce cooperation in terms of marine scientific research between two countries, including exchanges of data and also reasonable exploitation of marine living resources. The Article 13, as I just said, created the Joint Fisheries Committee. So the Fisheries Committee has the responsibility to manage the zone. So there are some meetings organized once a year, alternatively in South Korea and China. List of species that can be fished is prepared by the committee. Some quotas are also decided. The objective is to ensure a stable order of fishing operations and conservation of living resources. And of course, the Joint Fisheries Committee has to monitor the correct implementation of the agreement. So, with this decision taken by two states, we can say that there is a progress, there is a dialogue between China and South Korea for trying to manage the fisheries resource in the Yellow Sea. However, 18 years after, the main observation we can have is that it's still difficult for two countries to really implement this agreement, and especially from the South Korean point of view, mainly due to the lack of cooperation between two states. In fact, the main problem is that this zone didn't solve the problem of the domination of the Yellow Sea by Chinese fishermen and the growing Chinese illegal fishing. And therefore, fishermen, researchers, and some officials in South Korea called today for clear, definitive delimitation between two EEZ in the Yellow Sea. But it's mainly impossible to find a solution because two countries disagree about the principle they have to adopt. So that's the context in terms of fisheries and geopolitical situation with the zone. So I'm going ahead now with the Chinese illegal fishing in the Yellow Sea. Two photos for showing the problem. If you have a look on media, and especially South Korean media, you can find a lot of photos like this with numerous Chinese swallows and some violent clash between fishermen and South Korean Coast Guard. So what is really the situation? It's difficult, of course, to have a clear view because we don't have data about the reality of the Chinese illegal fishing in the Yellow Sea. According to some report written in Korea, according to some report from the National Assembly of South Korea, according also to some report from the Korea Maritime Institute in Busan, the problem is that most part of Chinese boats operating in the fisheries zone cross the line and go to the South Korean waters for fishing. So the estimation is there are between 2,000 and 3,000 Chinese vessels operating in the zone during 1 year. And half of them cross the line and go fishing to the South Korean waters. Another problem is there is also an important zone of Chinese illegal fishing here between the northern limit line, South Korean northern limit line, and the North Korean demarcation line. This is a disputed zone between two Koreas, and many Chinese fishermen go to this zone, and South Korean Coast Guard don't intervene very strongly because they are worried about a potential clash with North Korea. So it's a very sensitive zone, and Chinese fishermen try to take benefit of this complex geopolitical situation. So some data we have for trying to assess statistically the Chinese illegal fishing is the number of sized Chinese vessels and crews by South Korean Coast Guard. So I put in the table some data from 2002 to 2011, but I try to update with some figures from 2011 to 2014, and we are in the same, approximately between 350 and 550 Chinese vessels are sized by the South Korean Coast Guard every year. So now, why we have this situation? What are the main causes of the Chinese illegal fishing in the Yellow Sea? First, I just list causes, and of course some of causes are more important than others. The first cause is the establishment of the joint fisheries zone, coupled with the overcapacity in China's fisheries sector, which have increased the competition for resources in a general context of scarcity of resources. Another cause is the high level of pollution in Chinese coastal waters. Even though the Yellow Sea is less polluted than the Pearl River Delta, we have a level of pollution, an important level of pollution. Of course, the growth of China's domestic demand for seafood, which is one of the most important causes. The motivation of Chinese fishermen to increase their economic gain or ensure minimum revenue. Another cause is the small area of the Yellow Sea and the short distance between Korean waters and Chinese ports. 85% of the size Chinese vessels between 2005 and 2011 presented in the previous table were from Shandong and Liaoning. And if I show the map, you can easily see that from the Liaodong Peninsula or the Shandong Peninsula or the Liaodong Peninsula, it's very, they can go to Korean waters very quickly. Another cause is, and we can find this cause in the Chinese literature, the lack of knowledge of China's fishermen about the evolution of the fishery regime in the Yellow Sea. So what I forgot to mention before is among the Chinese vessels sized by the South Korean Coast Guard, you have some Chinese vessels allowed to fish in the fisheries zone, but they cross the line, so they are illegal after that. But you have also some vessels that they don't have the license, fishing license in China. So they are also illegal vessels in China, but they go to the fishery zone and they also cross the line. So the lack of knowledge of Chinese fishermen about the evolution of the fishery regime in the Yellow Sea is mainly for fishermen who have the authorization, the permit for fishing in the zone. And another factor is the vessels of Chinese fishermen are under-equipped, about a technology device or radar, and they don't have connaissance exactly of the coordinated of the line, and they can cross the line accidentally. So it's difficult to know when you have the accident and when you have the intention. So there is different point of view between Chinese observers and South Korean observers about which cause is the most important, but there is an agreement that the depletion of resources in the Yellow Sea, coupled with the permanence of an important number of fishermen in China, are the main causes. So the Chinese illegal fishing in South Korean water is interrelated with some problematic in China in terms of fisheries policy. Mainly, the failure up to now of the China's policy to reduce the overcapacity of the fisheries in China, especially the coastal fisheries or offshore fisheries, but I think that the fisheries activity in the Yellow Sea can be qualified as coastal fisheries or maybe offshore, but it's not really distant sea. At the provincial level, in Shandong and the Liaoning, there is also the social challenge of the reemployment of fishermen, and also the desire to increase the production of seafood. In total, divergences and great difficulties to enforce the licensing system. So the failure to reduce the overcapacity of the fisheries, the social challenge to re-employ fishermen, and the great difficulties to enforce the licensing system, because at the provincial level, there is frequently some schizophrenic position about we have to increase the catches, but we have also to protect the fishery stock. And sometimes there were a lot of contradictions, and policy cannot be implemented very strictly. In terms of consequences, the one of the most important consequences is the clash between Chinese fishermen and South Korean Coast Guard, which have also some diplomatic consequences, some tensions and problems. The importance of Chinese illegal fishing in the Yellow Sea turned this maritime space into a battlefield. So you can, this term is employed in South Korea like in China. And another consequence, of course, is about the sustainability, because the illegal fishing increase the overfishing and the depletion of the stock. Some report from the Korea Maritime Institute mentioned those last years that some fish species decreased, and there is also a decreasing of South Korean catches in South Korean waters. Some report mentioned that the illegal catches of Chinese fishermen in Korean waters are around 650,000 tons. If I show you the first, this one or this one, okay. If I show you this table, the South Korean catches in 2013 is around 400,000 tons, but some report from the Korea Maritime Institute mentioned that the illegal catches of Chinese vessels are 100,000 tons. So it's more the legal catches of South Korean vessels in their own waters. So this is some figures. We are not sure that it's really precise or if it's approximative, but it gives an idea of the importance of the problem. So, what are the solutions about illegal Chinese fishing? Two countries try to take some measures. Two types of measures: unilateral measures and bilateral measures. The unilateral measures in South Korea more focused on security and control. Recently, new maritime police bases has been established on Pangnyeong-do and Heungsang-do. So, if I have time to show you the map, Pangnyeong-do is approximately here, and Heungsang-do is one island located here. So, two posts for monitoring and preventing the Chinese illegal fishing. Another measure is to establish, the South Korean authorities established some artificial reefs since 2013. You have in the same sector that I just showed, like a seawall, a wall of artificial reefs, especially in the zone between the two Korean lines, near the estuary of Han River. The last one has been established at the beginning of this year, 2018. So officially is also for protecting fishery resource, because the artificial reef is also a tool for trying to protect the stock and rejuvenate some stock, but it's also a mean to prevent and to fight against the Chinese illegal fishing, because it could be a little bit dangerous for vessels and also for the net. In October 2016, stronger measures has been taken by the South Korean Ministry of Public Safety and Security, allowing the South Korean Coast Guard to use force and firearms against illegal fishermen who would refuse to obey or resist to their interventions. And most part of the time, Chinese fishermen resist, because they have to pay very, very high penalties. The average of the penalties in South Korea those last 5 years increased a lot. So for fishermen, it's very complicated to have to pay at sea this kind of penalties. If they don't pay, the South Korean Coast Guard seizes the vessels, and there is after that some judgment in South Korea. So most part of the time there is a clash, because they don't want to pay the penalties, and South Korean Coast Guard are supposed to use force and firearms in this case of situation. And last year in December and at the beginning of this year, South Korean Coast Guard shot some Chinese vessels in the Korean waters. There is also some unilateral measures in China, but I will go back to this in my conclusion. Two countries tried to have a dialogue or cooperate for trying to solve this problem. So some bilateral measures have been taken, more based on cooperation and dialogue. So there is frequently joint call for measures to crack down on illegal fishing by Chinese boats. Call stated by Chinese officials, for example, Xi Jinping in 2014, during his visit in South Korea, said we have to fight against the Chinese illegal fishing. We have to not fight, but you have to find a solution and to cooperate together for solving this issue. You have the annual meetings of the China-South Korea Fisheries Committee, which try to communicate and dialogue about this. More recently, in 2012, two countries decided to establish meetings on fisheries cooperation 2 times a year, which are supposed to be an important channels for communication and consultation regarding the Chinese illegal fishing. So from 2012 to July 2016, the meetings have been held, but from 2016 to 2018, these meetings have been cancelled, especially because there were the crisis of the SAD in between South Korea and China at that time. The anti-missile theater developed by the United States in South Korea. So there were a lot of tensions between two countries, and China decided to cancel the meetings. But last month, two countries decided to start again. So we will see if it will be held in the long term. In 2015, other decisions have been taken, adoption of some agreement or memorandum. And in June 2016, some meeting between South Korean Coast Guard and the China Coast Guard. There is also some joint control of the fisheries, common fisheries zone, organized by the two countries, but it's only one time a year, and I think up to 2016, only 7, between 2013 and 2016, 7 joint control have been organized. Many observers say that it's not really enough for controlling strictly the space. So, for conclude, the Chinese illegal fishing in the Yellow Sea represent a big challenge for two countries and for the China-South Korea Fisheries Agreement of 2000. This fisheries agreement is often considered as the symbol of good maritime relations between two countries, and this fisheries agreement is also considered as a tool for managing the fisheries resources in the Yellow Sea. And the Chinese illegal fishing is a very big challenge for that, but most part of observers today consider that the fishery zone is not useful. It would be better to cancel the zone and to trying to delimit the clear EEZ, even though the delimitation of a clear EEZ in the Yellow Sea won't solve the problem of Chinese illegal fishing, because main cause of the problem are in China and depend of the China's fisheries policy. The key is in China, and will depend of policies that Beijing and two provinces of Liaoning and Shandong will implement. And we know that there are great difficulties in provinces in China to implement the fisheries license system. Big challenge because China's fisheries policy is facing a dilemma since the end of the 90s, so already 20 years, between protecting fishery resources and feeding the growing domestic market, but also feeding the international market, because China is a big exporter of seafood. So if you read some statement of Chinese officials from the Ministry of Agriculture at the end of the 90s, and you read some statement in 2016 when the 13 5-year plan has been decided, you have approximately the same discourse. I'm a little bit provocative mentioning that, but of course the discourse is we have to protect the fish stock, we have to fight against overfishing, and we have to find a solution about illegal fishing, even though the illegal fishing was less severe at the end of the 90s than now. And one of the main issues is the reemployment of Chinese fishermen. So some colleagues this morning recall this Chinese measure. That's, of course, very important, but it's not enough. The problem is that you are a network, several nodes of this network, and you can implement some measures in each node, but if you don't implement another measure on another node, it doesn't work. So you can reduce the fleet, but if you reduce the fleet, you have to find some reemployment or employment alternative for Chinese fishermen. But if you do that, and that the Chinese consumption of seafood continue to increase, it's not useful because you reduce the fleet, but at the province level, some fisheries company try to build larger vessel, and they go to fish further in the distant, more distant sea. So I will stop here, but of course, the main solution is a big reform of the fisheries sector in China, and it's not. It's more institutional, and it's really a political issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastien. Do you have questions? Yes.
I understand that this fisheries agreement with the joint committee works rather well. Beyond that, is there some diplomatic pressure when the Chinese vessels and captains are punished rather strongly by the Korean courts? Some information about that.
The discourse is each time you have seizure of Chinese vessel in Korean waters, and when you have also arrestation of some crews, of course there is a diplomatical reaction in China. But the reaction is not, you don't have the right to size the vessels and the crew. The reaction is it's important to follow the international law or the national law, and don't use violence. The main critics by China against South Korea is that the South Korean guards are too violent to Chinese fishermen. So the authorities are between two chairs because they cannot support diplomatically and in the discourse Chinese fishermen because they make something illegal. And this last year, the Chinese authorities taken a lot of coercive measures against some Chinese companies. For example, in Fujian, there is a companies, the Fuzhou Honglong companies. One of the vessels of these companies has been seized in the Equatorian water of the Galapagos Islands with plenty of shark carcasses. And so the Coast Guard, the Equatorian Coast Guard arrested the crews, and 20 of them has been sent to jail. China just said you have to do that in accordance with your law, so not too much severe, you have to. And at the national scale, the Fuzhou Honglong companies, the Chinese authorities asked the companies to stop its activities. So there were some coercive measures towards the company. And since 2016, yes, we can observe more and more this kind of measures taken by the Chinese authority against Chinese companies. So that's mainly this reaction. They just want that there is no too much violence against Chinese fishermen, because the Chinese authorities, of course, also have to protect nationals abroad.
Well, thank you very much, Sebastien, for this very informative presentation. And by the way, I'm Jean-Pierre Cabestin from Hong Kong Baptist University. Sorry for coming so late in this conference, but I wasn't able to come earlier. A couple of questions. First of all, you mentioned as causes of those incidents two things. First of all, the lack of knowledge, and the other thing is the under-equipment of some vessels, Chinese vessels. How much do you think those reasons are really good reasons, or are they excuses? Because these disputes have been going on for many years, so I'm sure that the Chinese fishermen must be pretty well aware of what the dangers are of crossing the line. Mm-hmm. So and whether they are under-equipped, it remains to me a mystery, because they're pretty well equipped now with all sort of radars and GPS systems. So they know very well. So that's my first question. The second question, the impact of the government's view on overcapacity, because I think the Chinese government, as you mentioned, in general has really tried to sort of limit the overcapacity or reduce it. Has it affected the fleets, fishing boat fleets in Shantung and Liaoning? And finally, my last question is about North Korea. Can you tell us more about whether there are disputes between China and North Korea? I think there is an agreement with North Korea, but there must be disputes as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for your questions. So first, regarding the lack of knowledge and the under-equipped vessels, it can be an excuse, but it's not an excuse. You cannot, because the reality is that most part of vessels are under-equipped. Of course, some of them are, so they can cross the line intentionally and fishing illegally. If I read recently a document from insurance company of the maritime transport. The company is Huatai Yocian Gongse in Xiamen. The document was published by the office of Huatai company in Xiamen. And the document alerted most clients of these companies because the end of the fishing ban or the summer moratorium were approached, and they wanted to alert them, okay, after the 16th of August or after 1st of September, numerous Chinese fisheries vessels will go to fish. And Cui Liang this morning showed us photos with numerous of vessels in the sea. And of course, for the maritime transport, there is a risk of collision. So the insurance company want to alert about that. And in the report, they mentioned that you have to know that most part of vessels are under-equipped, so they cannot monitor very precisely the sea. So they just ask for their client to be careful about that. So that's a proof, I think, that it's a reality. But I didn't check every vessel's. I don't know if Hongzhou have some information about that, but I didn't check every vessel, so I cannot respond precisely. Regarding your second question, it was, I already forgot.
Overcapacity.
The overcapacity.
Controlled by the authorities, by the Chinese government.
So about the reduction of overcapacity by Chinese government, that's I remember when the China implement the new fisheries law, one of the in 2000, so 18 years ago. One of the main objectives of that was to reduce the overcapacity. And in the beginning of 2000 decade, we had a lot of the Chinese provinces tried to implement the measures. Also your question was about Shandong. Yes. So yes, recently and Cui Liang shows one table this morning mentioning that the fleet of Shandong, the Shandong province has the second biggest fleet in China. And the charts that Liang Cui show showed the declining of the number of vessels from 2015. So it seems that those last 3 years, okay, some vessels have been reduced in Shandong province, but up to now we cannot see the real consequences about illegal fishing. There is no reduction of illegal fishing. So I think we need more time to analyze and to know if these kind of decisions have a real impact. It's too early, I think, now for responding. And about North Korea, there were some formal agreement between China and North Korea in terms of fisheries. Chinese fishermen are allowed to fish in North Korean waters, not only in the Yellow Sea, but also in the East Sea. And that's a problem for South Korean fishermen also in the East Sea, because there was a reduction of some stocks in the East Sea. So we know that Chinese fishermen have the permission to fish in the North Korean waters. And sometimes they first go to North Korean waters, and when they go back to China, they cross the demarcation line and fish in the South Korean waters.
Okay, so we'll take one last question. You have the microphone. You can ask. You have the microphone, and you can ask Sebastien.
What is it? Property is 9/10 of the law, or whatever. Yeah, my question is about artificial reefs. You mentioned them briefly as one of the options being considered or being put in place, and for one of the reasons being as a physical barrier. Mm-hmm. So I'll put that physical barrier to trawling aside, because artificial reefs are often proposed to be an effective measure, or potentially effective measure, for restoring fisheries.
Yes, yes.
I've recently done a review with colleagues on this, and there's actually no evidence, in fact, that they do help to recover fisheries. And yet so many people talk about artificial reefs, I suppose because it's something that seems attractive and seems like it should work, and because artificial reefs do tend to assemble fish and they look like they're doing something. But I'm actually curious just to ask how serious the proposal is to use artificial reefs specifically for fishery recovery or restoration.
Okay. I just read that it was one of the reasons, but because I'm not biologist, so I cannot assess if it's real effective. But another reason why South Korea decided to install the artificial reef is for preventing illegal fishing. So, but it can be very dangerous for vessels. So I don't know exactly what's happened.
South Korea has implemented lots of artificial reef in its coastal waters to prevent trawling.
Okay.
There is no illusion about recovering stock, except through the prevention of trawling. This is they talk about anti-climate device.
I know, but artificial reefs are still widely spoken about in the region.
Yeah, but
for fisheries.
the South Korean mentioned them explicitly to prevent trawling, and they construct them such that you can't, that it will rip your net if you go across one.